Welcome to this explainer of our source material, where we're unpacking the foundational and honestly, surprisingly contradictory roots of the Indian nationalist movement. We're going to build a really fascinating narrative today around a group of pioneers who started a political revolution. But here's the catch. They didn't do it with weapons or uprisings. No, they used petitions, legal arguments, and a profound, perhaps even startling faith in their colonial rulers.
We're focusing on a very specific 20-year historical window right here, between 1885 and 1905. This represents the first real phase of Congress work. Now, imagine an era where the idea of a completely independent India wasn't even the main conversation yet. Instead, this crucial block of time was all about laying the initial groundwork. It was about establishing a unified political voice and navigating a very delicate political tightrope.
Let's officially define this era. It was entirely dominated by a group of political pioneers known simply as the moderates. These folks were the intellectuals, the lawyers, the journalists, the educators. Essentially, they were the ones who took the very first structured steps towards self-advocacy for the Indian subcontinent.
So, let's dive into the narrative with a question that might actually surprise you. Did these founding fathers of the national movement actually want the British to leave India? Well, when we think of nationalism, our minds usually jump straight to fierce independent struggles, right? Demands for total sovereignty. But as our source material reveals, the story of these early pioneers is way more layered than just a simple demand for freedom.
And this brilliantly illustrates their core paradox. On one hand, they were fiercely loyal to British justice and honestly didn't want to remove the British. But on the other hand, they desperately wanted to modernize Indian society. It's a fascinating dual narrative. They viewed the British presence not as some occupying force to be destroyed, but actually as a catalyst for reform from within. They genuinely believed that by using British administrative and legal tools, they could uplift their own society.
Section 1. Architects of the movement, the prominent moderate leaders.
Leading the charge of this delicate balancing act were some truly iconic figures. Take Dadabhai Naoroji, for instance, affectionately and universally respected as the grand old man of India. Beside him was Bonnerjee. He was a highly successful lawyer who brought intense legal acumen to the table, notably serving as the very first president of the Indian National Congress. Together, they really provided the movement with its initial legitimacy, respectability, and organizational structure.
We also have G. Subramanya Iyer, who was just a true media and political powerhouse. He practically weaponized the power of the press to shape a national narrative, founding both the Hindu and Swadesh Mitran newspapers. But he wasn't just a writer, he was an institution builder, acting as the co-founder of the Madras Mahajan Sabha. And we absolutely must highlight Gopal Krishna Gokhale. He was celebrated as a servant of Indian society, a title that just perfectly captures the moderates' whole ethos of selfless public service. You probably know him best, though, for the profound historical impact he had on the next generation. He's famously known as the political guru of Gandhiji. You can clearly see how the ideological DNA of the moderates really laid the foundation for the leaders who would follow. Now, this vision wasn't confined to just a few men. As our source material maps out, there was an incredibly intricate, highly interconnected network of leaders spreading this ideology all across the country. It proves this wasn't just a handful of isolated individuals talking in a room. It was a deeply connected, widespread intellectual movement. This broader coalition included brilliant minds from all over India. We're talking M.G. Ranade, Pherozeshah Mehta, Madan Mohan Malavia, and incredibly, the list even includes British figures like William Wedderburn. This just proves their movement wasn't strictly anti-British at all. They welcomed literally anyone who shared their progressive vision for a modernized, fairly administered Indian society.
Section 2. The Case of Bonnerjee. When loyalty meets reality. To really understand the limits of this moderate philosophy, we have to look at Sir Surendranath Banerjee. He was a towering intellect of the era. I mean, he earned these incredibly grand titles from his peers like the Indian Burke, comparing his formidable speaking skills to the great British statesman Edmund Burke, and Rashtra Guru, which translates to the teacher of the nation. The guy was an absolute force to be reckoned with.
He was also a man of immense action. He founded the Indian National Association, which was a major precursor to the Congress itself, and he published the highly influential newspaper, The Bengali. He was executing the moderate playbook perfectly, using civic organizations and the press to engage with both the public and the state.
So he proved his absolute merit by clearing the elite Indian civil service exam. That was a monumental feat back then. But then comes the tragic twist in the narrative. He was discharged. The reason? Blatant racial discrimination.
This personal, totally unjust discharge perfectly captures the tension of the era. Seriously, how long can a movement believe in British justice when its brightest minds are actively facing systemic racial discrimination? Bonnerjee played by all the rules. He excelled within the British framework and was still cast aside simply because of his race. It exposes the harsh reality that loyalty and merit were simply not enough to overcome the entrenched prejudices of the colonial administration.
Section 3. An unfinished agenda, the limits of moderation.
So what happens when loyal reformers hit a systemic brick wall? Well, it leaves us with an unfinished agenda. To truly understand this era, our source material points to a few further analysis topics we need to explore: the moderates' specific aims and demands, their methods, the government's response, and ultimately, their successes and limitations.
Which leaves you with this provocative thought. If the unwavering loyalty and intellectual brilliance of these moderates were consistently met with a glass ceiling of racial discrimination, what methods do you think the Indian national movement had to adopt next? When the politics of petition and a staunch belief in inherent justice fail, how exactly does a nation's narrative of resistance change? Thank you for joining me for this explainer of the source material, and keep exploring the fascinating complexities of our history.